Well, we're back again with a solo episode. Jacques, nowhere to be found for weeks now. And I don't even know who that was. But what I'm gonna talk about today, guys, is just some techniques in the garden that are unpopular that we still do, at least sometimes here at the Homestead, to show you that the rules in the garden are not as strict as some might have you believe. I know that, we'll put out videos all the time about do this, don't do that, but I think here at Epic, we like to make those more of suggestions than hard and fast rules. So I wanna show you can still have a crazy productive garden. Look at this dragon fruit alley by breaking some of them. The first technique has to do with planting tomatoes, but before I talk about it, I just wanna show you these tomatoes. These are the ones that we planted about a month ago that we got from Tomato Mania. And the colors on them are absolutely crazy. This one right here is Gondwana Moon. I don't think I've seen a tomato quite this purple in a while, although some of them are starting to blush a little bit. But yeah, this is my first big tomato that's purple I've grown in quite some time. Then you get a nice honker right over here. So I knew I was gonna get some big ones, but look at that, nice little striped guy. This one is Harvard Square, another one that I have yet to grow. Another purple guy right here is Persuasion. A little bit less purple than Gondwana Moon, maybe some stripes coming in here, but nevertheless, great color. Here we have the Sartre Rolloy. Hopefully I said that correctly. Seems like a French, I never can say French words correctly, but look at the coloration on that. Beautiful purple up at the shoulders, purple stripes coming down to like this greenish, creamish bottom. Hopefully we'll see that color change, but man, what a beautiful, and it's got that heirloom shape as well. Not an interesting color per se on this one, but these are the Gladiator tomatoes. Look at the monster size. I've got pretty big hands, guys. I mean, that's a solid sized plum style tomato. You usually don't see plums this big. So I'm very pleased with the ones that we got from Tomato Mania, but now let's talk about the technique. So a lot of the times people will say you have to plant a tomato deep. Why? Because the tomato produces roots on its stem and it's gonna get better, da, da, da. It's true, that definitely happens. And I would say it's almost the unpopular technique to just plant a tomato normally, but these days, that is what we do, or we do something called the trenching method. So with all of the tomatoes in this line, we planted them in a trenched, sort of folded over fashion where we dug a trench out to the left or to the right, and then we planted the tomato stem on its side and bent it up, which I think is probably the least popular way you see people recommend to grow tomatoes. But in just about a month's time, we're seeing some fantastic growth down this line. So if I said, hey, what's the best beginner way to plant a tomato? I would actually just say, take it out of its pot, plant it right at the soil line in the pot. Don't worry about burying it deep at all. It does not make much of a difference. And in some of our grow tests actually slowed it down a little bit. But I might recommend the trenching method if you can get over the fear of having that stem go horizontal and then curve up. I think you can get a little afraid it might break, it might bend too much, and you might damage it, but we haven't had that problem. And with a little bit of cleanup, there's a couple weeds in here, this is going to be a highly productive tomato section of the garden. And then we're also doing, I would say, a pretty basic trellising method here by using rebar. So you drive the rebar down into the ground, then just put a conduit on top, and then just tie it up. Nothing fancy on this trellising method either, which I think also is slightly unpopular. Leave it to tomatoes to have all of the unpopular techniques in the world. So another thing that we're doing here on our tomatoes, for I would say 90% of the tomatoes that we grow, is we're just going to be pruning them to single stem leaders, even if we lose a little bit of yield. A lot of people don't like this technique these days because it's just technically losing some yield. I mean, if you were to grow an indeterminate tomato, let it go to a double leader perhaps, or even just let it go wild, technically you would get more fruit over the course of a season, assuming your season doesn't like kill the tomato off. In our case, I'm going to trade out a little bit of yield for a lot more organization, better airflow, maybe a little bit better disease management over the course of the season. But why? Because it's the same as the orchard, guys. I don't need 200 per plant. I'm fine with 50 tomatoes for each of the plants in this row. There's like 16 or 14 tomatoes here. So that would be hundreds of tomatoes. I don't need more than that, especially because this isn't even my only tomato garden. So to me, pruning indeterminates or sometimes even determinates, I know, the crazy, right? A little bit down, to me, helps keep the garden more organized. Next technique is what you see in some of the pathways of this garden here. Look at this plant. Looks like a weed, right? This is actually purslane. which honestly most people do consider a weed, but you can eat it, you can pickle it, you can put it in with carrots in a nice quick pickle. Turns out okay. If I see a weed like purslane in the row, of which you can see it kind of all over the place here, sometimes I just leave it. The reason why is twofold. Honestly, in a 1/3 of an acre garden, when you're running all sorts of tests all the time, sometimes weeding does take a lower priority. And yes, we could mulch this entire area and hopefully block off some of that weed pressure, but we're mulching right around where the tomato stems are entering the ground. We feel pretty comfortable with that. And honestly, it's kind of like a living mulch, especially when you're looking at weeds like a purslane or some of these like kind of easy ones to get out of the ground if you really had to put your back into it. We'll just take a stirrup hoe and run it through every so often. I'm not coming out and weeding it like all the time over and over and over again, because right now it's just kind of green living mulch. And then when I throw the stirrup hoe on it, that is going to just decompose. So sometimes we'll leave weeds in place, but it really does depend on the weed. For example, as we enter the orchard, as per usual, guess what's back? Bermuda grass. So this is one of those where if I see it, I'm going to make sure and do as much as I can to get rid of this as soon as possible, which is usually going to mean sometimes actually hiring some help. We'll have some help come out and just really clear this out. But if you get it early like this, you can get it out pretty easily, especially if it's just recently rained, which thankfully it has. You can just, look at that. You can feel it separate itself from the soil. If you hear those cracks, that means you've ripped the root and it's going to propagate itself again. But this is a good one to actually remove. Now we're on to the orchard, where I do a lot of somewhat unpopular things, I would say. I plant my trees a lot closer than even some backyard orchardists would recommend or even practice. So for example, this massive wall right here is not one pomegranate, it's actually two, and they're sort of running into each other in this middle section here. I have, I believe, a Parfionca here and a wonderful right here. And so the question is like, why are you doing this? Don't you have more space? Why can't you just do that? The thing is, I'm treating these two pomegranates, for example, as effectively one plant. I'm gonna get two different varieties, yes, but to me, they're both pomegranates and I wanna try them both. They're gonna ripen at slightly different windows and I'm gonna prune them as effectively one combined shrub. And when it comes to my citrus orchard as well, it's really the same kind of logic. I'm treating this entire row of citrus as perhaps the most horizontally growing citrus of all time. 14 different varieties, almost treated as one, spaced about 4 feet apart. I am gonna have to solve this area soon. You can see which ones have not been getting as much irrigation. These ones, this is my weakness right here. But what I'm doing then is I'm going to be pruning this off as if it is one tree, meaning if this one is not as tall as this one right here, I need to bring this one down so that the lowest level in the entire hedge is treated as kind of the base layer. Otherwise, you're going to get situations where this bear's lime is going to be blocking out my satsuma right here, and I don't want that. So as you see me prune, which is coming up in a future episode, I'll take this down. Even if it was a standalone tree, I might not have. In this case, I will, and that's the exact same kind of pruning logic I used for this, I believe, Washington navel and my yuzu. My yuzu, which is probably in the least favorable spot for sun because it's being blocked by this guy and by the loquat. The sun rises over there and it sets over there. So for a good, half the day, it's blocked off by this angle here. What I did is I took this one down to its height, and now this one has come up and started to match. There was a time where the yuzu was about there and this other tree was about up to here. So I had to take this one down. So it's thinking about the trees not as individual elements. So it's thinking about your trees in your orchard not as individual elements, but as part of this wider system that you're trying to get a specific result for. I think that's the key. Is like, I want enough citrus off of this that I'm gonna get a good yield off everything, but I'm not gonna get like explosive growth off one and have like no lemons, but have unlimited oranges. This raised bed right here is a perfect example of another slightly unpopular technique we'll sometimes use, which is unmulching a raised bed. Now, I'll admit, this is not one that we use all that often because here in San Diego, Zone 10B, we do not get a lot of rain. And in fact, we don't have that many cold and wet springs, but sometimes we do. And of course, if you're in lower zones or if you're over in the UK, that's a pretty common occurrence for you. So sometimes early in the spring, it's a better idea not to mulch until that spring season really starts to transition, into the higher temperatures for a couple reasons. Number one, it's simply just raining a lot. You don't need water retention when you're getting rain on the garden bed all the time. And if you're in an area with a ton of slugs or snails or things that like that decomposing mulch material as either a home base or sometimes even to eat, like roly-polies or earwigs, you can actually exacerbate a pest problem by over mulching earlier in the season. We've had a little bit of rain here recently. We just changed over this bed. We're not going to mulch this for a little bit until we see those temps start to come up, where we actually do need to protect the surface of the soil from losing moisture. As we come up on my garlic crop, I do have to say it's a better garlic year, but I have a feeling it's still going to struggle just a little bit, because I'll pull one for you and I'll show you what we're dealing with here. I think we just got a little bit of a root issue, although we do have some decent clove formation on this. This is not as big as you would hope for it to be. You can tell these cloves aren't fully separated yet, but the plant above the ground is kind of nearing the end of its life. And I also forgot to take off the scapes. This would be the scape right here in a hard-necked garlic. Usually you'd take it off when it's curling like this, and I didn't do that. So sometimes you win some, you lose some, but this brings us to our next sort of unpopular thing, which is really letting the garden get a little bit overgrown and wild. So in the garlic patch this year, we had sweet potatoes last year, and if you're a discerning gardener, you can tell what those leaves are right there. We must have either missed a sweet potato or some slips or something, because they're starting to colonize what was once the thriving garlic patch. Now, normally I would not allow this to happen, because garlic, or really any allium, look at the way these grow. They do not want to compete root-wise with anything else, and that can impact their yield. But given that I saw some early struggles going on with the garlic, Paul and the team let me know, hey, I think we might have a garlic issue this year. Not as severe as last year, thankfully, but a little bit of an issue. I'm just gonna let these sweet potatoes grow in, because I'm not so worried about outcompeting the garlic when it's already struggling a bit and it's coming up on the end of its life. So I'm gonna thank Mother Nature for giving me a free and nice and clear segue into that spring and summer season, whereas I could have ripped that out and missed out on a beautiful sweet potato harvest come summer, while also having somewhat mediocre garlic. Before I tell you the next one, look at this branching sunflower, guys. The height on this is absolutely crazy, and we did not plant it. It just came up. I feel like branching sunflowers come up all over the garden. Okay, the next one. I think this technique is becoming a little bit more popular, but we will pick tomatoes often at Epic Gardening here at the Homestead at what's called the breaker stage. So this tomato here is a little bit past that breaker stage, because a lot of it has started to turn red. This one right here is not at the breaker stage at all, because it is perfectly green. See if I can find one that's kind of close here. This one not either. But what you're really looking for is you're looking for red to start to develop on the tomato. The second you start seeing a color change or a color break, then you know you can harvest this tomato. So I can harvest this one, of course. It's much more ripe than a pure breaker stage. But if I start seeing a little blush on this guy, I can harvest that immediately. And that kind of counteracts the, oh, I need my tomatoes to be vine ripe type of wisdom. But the truth is, once they hit that breaker stage, they pretty much are vine ripe. You're not going to see a crazy amount of flavor development, if any at all, from there. And then if you're like us and you're growing tons and tons of tomatoes, what you want to do is store them upside down like this. Because if you think about it, if I can get this stem off there, look at the weight distribution of this tomato. If I put it down like this, a lot of that weight is going to be on a single point, which would be this little bottom part right here. Whereas these are the tomato shoulders right here. If I put it down on the shoulders, it's going to be distributing the weight in a ring kind of right around where that stem enters the tomato. It doesn't make a huge difference, but honestly, if you're storing like hundreds of tomatoes, storing them upside down in a flat area and taking them off at the breaker stage is a lot more helpful, because you have more time for it to ripen off the plant, of which of course the flavor is going to be basically the exact same as if you let it get to full ripe on the plant. And you're going to dodge the birds, pests, and splitting issues that you can get. If I let this go ripe, I mean, look, there's even a chance it would start splitting right about there if I let this go a little bit overripe and truly vine ripened it. So I think a lot of people, it's counterintuitive, but you can pick a tomato much, much earlier than you think, which I think is helpful for those of you that are growing tons of tomatoes like myself and definitely like Jacques. So the garden right now is in a crazy state of change. We're ripping out all sorts of different beds. We're switching in summer harvests. We've got some very interesting experiments going on. And of course, our pond remodel from a few episodes ago, I would say has been a smashing success. Look at that Pride of Madeira back there. And then of course, look at the passion fruit as well. I feel like this pond finally has a true backdrop. So when you look out this way, it feels like it's being backstopped by some beautiful visuals. Of course, when that starts to bloom, it'll go even crazier. Mexican feathergrass also doing really well. So a lot of cool things coming to the Epic Homesteading channel this season. Hope you're excited for it. I definitely am. Let me know if you have an unpopular gardening technique that you do down in the comments. I'm kind of curious what wisdom you break, and I'll see you in the next one. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.